to introduce my colleague, my sister, my homie, because most of you guys know I grew up in New York, a great friend, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke from the People's Republic of Brooklyn.
First of all, let me take this opportunity to thank the president of this august university for allowing my colleague and sister friend to host what I know will be a very stimulating symposium and conversation today. Wow.
Y'all got it going on in Chicago. It's certainly my honor and my privilege to come and to be a part of this symposium. It's been a vision of the co-chairs of the Caucus on Black Women and Girls that we can convene women intergenerationally across the United States to really mobilize, inform, educate, transform, and utilize our energy to the benefit of really transforming our communities. And so today is of no difference. Securing the bag, how Black women build generational wealth, is very critical. In the wake of the foreclosure crisis and the implosion in our economy, we saw so much of our generational wealth just wiped away. And a lot of that wealth was, quite frankly, ours, whether it was in our homes, in our 401k plans, in our retirement, just wiped away. And the fact that we were not in a position to really have a grip and control over our destiny should be a clarion call to all of us. Let me go to my prepared remarks, but I just want to get that off my chest. I'm Yvette D. Clarke, as my colleague has stated, and I proudly represent the 9th Congressional District of New York, located in central Brooklyn. And I'm here to lend support towards our collective goal of building wealth for Black women and girls. We are here because of our commitment towards closing the financial disparity between Black and white families. White American families' average wealth is 12 times higher than that of Black Americans. Research shows that Black women are the solution to building wealth in our communities, and Black women are the financial pillars of our families, and therefore the gender pay gap can only be addressed if we have the tools we need to challenge and overcome discrimination. I support strong, effective legislation to close the gender pay gap. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 was not enough because we all know from personal experiences that racial disparities still persist when it comes to the gender pay gap. In the 115th Congress, in which Rep. Kelly and I currently serve, I've co-sponsored the Paycheck Fairness Act, which is H.R. 1869. This bill is aimed to helping Black women and children receive the support they need to negotiate for fair wages. Oftentimes, particularly in the private sector, we're just so happy to get the position. You know, we're just so proud that we're in the space. We have no idea of what our predecessors made in that position, and therefore don't negotiate. We negotiate from the lowest salary that we've ever received. And so if we can make $2,000 or $3,000 more, we are happy. But we are not being smart in terms of having a full assessment of our worth, of our work, and our work ethic, and what value we bring to these companies. And so they're going to negotiate you down. We've got to learn. This April, I've charged the Federal Reserve Chairman Powell and the FDIC Chairman Grunberg to alleviate the difficulties small businesses around the country are facing, specifically in building business credit. Additionally, I've introduced legislation last month, the Streamlining Small Disadvantaged Business Act, H.R. 6514, which unifies the systems for small businesses small businesses to utilize the 8A programs, specifically those socially and economically disadvantaged. Critical to our growth is our entrepreneurial sector. And Black women have been the fastest growing cohort in that space across this nation. And as we clap about that, remember to support another sister's business. Hello. Hello. So it is never too late to start building wealth. And Black female-owned businesses, again, are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in this country, generating an excess of $51.4 billion in revenues. Even further, as Black Americans, our annual spending power is, in the aggregate, $1.2 trillion. So in closing, I want to thank my dear colleague and friend, Congresswoman Kelly, who serves her constituents with pride and distinction in the United States House of Representatives. She and I are one of the 3 co-founders and co-chairs of the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls, and I applaud her leadership, Congresswoman Kelly, on how we can advance financial and economic opportunities for Black women in America, and bringing us all to the table for this very important dialogue. And to my participants in the audience, I encourage you to listen to today's experts to learn how to take advantage of opportunities in real estate and in entrepreneurship so we may access, maintain, expand Black female wealth for ourselves and for generations to come. Succession planning, sisters. Succession planning. I know we all believe we're going to live until Methuselah's age, right? But the reality is that that is a practice that we have not embraced. And so when we're concerned about our children now, we don't think about them moving forward in the future. And when we don't educate our children about finances as well, when they are not as informed, we lose so much in generational wealth. I've seen it in Brooklyn. Some of the most valuable real estate in Brooklyn was owned by Black folk who migrated from the South up to Chicago and then up north. That real estate was not passed on to the descendants of those migrants who sacrificed everything to own in New York City. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is the descendants actually regressing in terms of income, in terms of standard of living. And so it is important that we lift the veil on the economics. For whatever reason, I don't know what it is, that generation just feels like the money is secret. And we can't be that way if we want to make sure that everything we have worked for, everything we have sacrificed for, not despite the discrimination and the disparities, is passed along to our children and grandchildren. I wanted to also just take this opportunity to acknowledge that we have been joined by Ismara from Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin's office. She actually drove from Wisconsin to be here with us. Would you just wave your hand? This sister is powerful. She's with us on Capitol Hill, and we want to thank her for driving in. And I yield back the balance of my time.
She's letting me reclaim my time. I'd also like to recognize some special people who are able to join us today. Ms. Tasha Brown Cruzat, who is the president of Voices for Illinois Children. If people could just wave their hands. Voices is a premier advocacy organization that champions strong public policy and investment for children throughout the state of Illinois. Marcia Young Cantrella, daughter of Whitney Young, we are honored you are joining us today and sharing your father's legacy. I also want to thank the members of my Black Women and Girls Advisory Group who not only helped shape today's event, but who have been volunteering all morning. And of course, none of this would be possible without my wonderful staff, my deputy, Audra Wilson, and my staffers, Jahan DeBose and Elise Miller. I see you in the back, Luis. I'll give the man a shout out. And now it is my true honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dory McWhorter, CEO of the YMCA, YWCA, yeah, YWCA of Metropolitan Chicago. Dory fired up our audience at our inaugural symposium in 2016. She's back again to fire you up and to share her insight and considerable wisdom on what Black women need to do to secure the bag. Thank you so much and enjoy.
Thank you, Congresswoman Kelly. See, I usually charge people for saying YMCA, but I know her heart, and I know that she knows that we're the YWCA, so I'm going to let her pass. And plus, she's given us the opportunity to have this amazing conversation today. I am so thrilled and just honored, as Congresswoman said, when the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls launched their inaugural event a couple years ago in Chicago, I was so honored to just be a part of that. And when I learned what the topic was today, I begged Audra to let me come back. See, I'm an accountant by background, so while I get the pleasure of leading the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago, I'm still a CPA and fully a CPA nerd. And so I'm just thrilled that we're actually having this conversation because money is a very hard thing for us to talk about. We actually do at the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago, we hold a session called Taboo Topics, Politics, Sex, and Money, because those are the three things that we as women never want to talk about. So we're going to cover at least one of those today, and we could talk about how to cover the other two at a later point. So Terry is going to work with me today and be my manual clicker up there, so I appreciate it. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm also, by background, I was a management consultant as well, a management consultant, and we don't do anything without a PowerPoint. And so I just had to just bring one today because particularly when we start talking money and graphics, you are really helpful, in my opinion, to really get to the bottom of that. So as we talk about, I think both of the congresswomen this morning have already hit on the high points relative to this topic around building wealth. And I hope to dig in a little deeper on that because I actually think that this is the time that we can actually think about what we do with our money in ways that were not thought about 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so I believe that we are on the cusp of an opportunity to really change the way things are not only done in this country, but actually in the world. And so I ask you to be open and participate, not only in terms of how you think about what I'm going to say today, but throughout the day as we've really assembled. And I congratulate Audra and the team for just bringing together what I think are just amazing experts in this area to give us a great amount of information. So we'll go on to the next slide, Terry. So I wanted to give you all a little background about myself because, as I mentioned, I'm an accountant, and I spent 20 years in management consulting and still am actually very active in the CPA profession. And I would be remiss if I didn't shout out the fact that we are in Chicago, and Chicago is the place where the first African-American woman CPA was actually licensed in the country. And this year, Mary T. Washington Wiley, so if you're familiar with the firm of Washington, Pittman, and McKeever, she is the founding member of that firm. And she was right here in Chicago, and this is actually the 75th anniversary of her becoming a CPA. So we stand in Chicago with great legacy here, particularly around women in money. And so I just had to say that. But as a business leader, I really focused on how we could leverage the power of business to really actually do good. And I really wanted, when I took this job at the YWCA, I knew of the 140-year-old legacy that we had in serving the community and in racial justice, but I took this opportunity because I believe that I could bring a perspective to the YWCA around how we could further leverage business to really advance our work. We've been at this 140 years. I wanted to see us accelerate the pace of change and want to use every aspect of our marketplace to do so. So we've always been focused on a very individual, what I would consider a very personal individual impact that we have. And I'm here today with some of my colleagues that are absolutely creating and making that impact today. But 5 years ago, when I joined the YWCA as CEO, I started talking about how we could partner differently with both business and government to create different types of programs and services that I believe could have greater economic impact, as well as a different type of impact and actually scale impact in the city. One of the things that we've done, for example, and my colleagues are here as we've now become a small business development center on the south side of Chicago, we launched an e-commerce platform called Y-Shop that allowed merchants, if you think about, I like to call us the Amazon for cause marketing, except they're not worried about us just yet. However, what we're able to do is we serve over 200,000 women and families, and we're able to use our platform for small businesses to come onto our platform, and we can help market to different audiences that they wouldn't typically have. Our Y-Shop actually has received Innovation of the Year from Chicago Tribune in 2015 when we first launched it, and we've seen the impact that that has had on the small businesses there. So that's one example of our partnerships as it relates to business. Another thing that we've done is partner with government in different ways. So we actually, again, in Chicago, became the first city in the country to provide free childcare to veterans with our Tiny Boots program. And so we partnered with the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs to make that happen. So we've been thinking very differently around how we can leverage business, how we can leverage different types of partnerships to really advance and move the needle on our work. The other area that we've done, and this can be popular or not, but we've really partnered with Uber as well to create more women drivers, because what we saw is that there were a need for opportunities on the south and west side of the city, and Uber was there and ready to provide those opportunities. And as a result of our partnership, Chicago has more women drivers, so 30% women drivers in the Chicago market, and that's the greatest percentage of drivers across any platform in the country. So we're also very proud of that, because that has put millions of dollars into the pockets of the women drivers that we work with, as well as allowed them in certain cases to qualify for child care subsidies when they were not employed in other means. So we're working to really advance how we can partner in a number of different ways. But what we found as we continued to look for opportunities and create partnerships, there was really a struggle. So Terry, this kind of be our cue that we're going to move forward. How about that? So don't think I have a little flicked here. I'm just trying to keep us moving. But what we saw as we continued to, particularly with me having a business background and working in a nonprofit space, I was often challenged with, well, you're a nonprofit and you're working with corporate America, and nonprofits, in the mindset that we would hear about all the time, are expected to be doing good, and corporate America was often labeled with being evil corporations. And I know we all have beef with certain companies about what they do, but the reality of it is that we thought that if we're going to advance the needle and accelerate, that we really need to think about this differently. And so I say doing good, but doing good however we define it. So whether we see doing good as feeding the hungry or other charitable work, or absolutely advancing gender and racial equality, these are the types of things that we felt that we could better leverage corporate America for, but really needed to have a different mindset around it. So this is where me being an accountant really jumps out. So what I just thought, so I'm trying to say, okay, our mission at the YWCA is to eliminate racism and empower women. We've been at this 140 years. I don't have 140 years. How are we going to accelerate that? So I said, let's look at the data. We have an $18 trillion economy, $trillion economy. 7% of that are nonprofits. So people always talk about, oh, nonprofits, they don't have enough resources, they can't get things done. We're only 7% of the economy. How much can we get done? Plus, when you talk about charities, that's only a small percentage of that. So we talk to our sisters that are represented in the government. And so then you still only have 40%. So between nonprofits and the government, who absolutely, some more than others, are working to advance the society and do good, we still have this big pot of 60% that represents corporate America or business. So for me, as we sat here and thought about, well, I know we're doing our part. We know the government is doing their part. Our congresswomen more than others, in my opinion, but we know they're working on it, doing their part. So how do we get that 60% engaged to care about our issues and to really advance our issues? So we said, that we had to grab them by the purse. So, and we know this, right? We know that at the end of the day, it's about money. We have to talk to business and money. So as much as a nonprofit, we like to go tell sad stories and tell corporations, you have to donate to us and give us money. Yeah, they do, and some are very altruistic and do that. But the reality of it is that most talk through the economic cycle. So the biggest ways, I feel like I'm in a class now, I'm like, it's just Chicago State. I'm like, who knows? But I feel like a couple of the ways that we think about this are really twofold. One is on the consumer side. We buy stuff, or we don't, to let a corporation know how we feel. The other piece is we invest. The reality is, or we really don't, to let a corporation know how we feel. Poor Terry, he just got to focus on me now. I'm sorry, Terry. So who remembers Not One Dime? So around the time, so a few years ago, when we were seeing the height of the discussion, at least, around police brutality, during Black Friday, we said, as a black community, that we would not spend one dime until people heard our issues. So we're used to doing this, right? We're used to saying, from a consumer perspective, that we can take control of our money and you won't get our money. Because like the Congresswoman said, we represent 1.2, actually I read 1.3, but she's a Congresswoman, we go 1.2 trillion dollars, but it's still trillion, right? Trillions of dollars that we represent in buying power that flows through corporate America every single day. So this is why I'm always surprised when we talk about, oh, we have no power. We got power. We absolutely have power. We just don't know we have power. And when we collectively pull our power together, we can really do some things, right? $1.3 trillion. If I really nerded out, I would look to see what level of a country that made us in the world. But that's a lot of money that we control directly out of our pockets. That's a really big deal. And how we choose to then leverage that. We saw with the NAACP just last year, they talked about boycotting American Airlines, right? In Chicago, United was like, whoop, whoop. But having said that, though, so we have the conversation. Now, are we collectively doing it? Could be another story. But at least we know, we recognize that we do have a tool in terms of our spending power and what we can do to that. The other piece that we actually don't think a lot about is the investor side of things. And I looked hard, but you know there are no black traders. Well, there's one black woman trader on the New York Stock Exchange, and I think we've all seen her on YouTube at this point. But the reality is so we have a consumer side. We're well versed in consumerism, so we're good there. The question becomes, what do we do on the investor side? Because capitalism needs capital, right? And so the investor piece is a very significant piece. And I would argue that companies listen, you know, it depends on who the company is, right? They listen to their investors, if not faster than they listen to their consumers, right? Because investors are so much earlier in the value chain relative to actually fueling the companies and the ability for them to actually do anything. So we're again here in Chicago, where we have the amazing company Ariel Investments, and they've done a study, and specifically study how black people engage in the stock market. And what they found is that black people are 35% less likely than whites of similar means to invest in the stock market. So what this means for us is that we lose that ability to actually influence corporate America, and even more importantly, it has a devastating consequence on our ability to accumulate wealth. So if you talk about the lack of participation in the stock market, and then think about, as we've also heard from the Congresswoman today, the impact of us not earning as much. So this statistic that I got here, really it says the average woman, which means what's a white woman, right? So $1.3 million less by the time they reach retirement age. $1.3 million less. So you know for us, if that was a little chart, we wouldn't even be on there right now, right? So I say that's us over there. I should just put a little down arrow because that's what we are relative to this statistic. So couple the fact that we're not investing in the stock market at the same rate as our white peers or other ethnic peers, and we're earning less, this could have a detrimental impact on us. So to me, the question becomes, what can we do? Well, we got to take care of our business, people, right? But the good thing is that we are. We're just starting to do so. We talked about the generational shift. You talked about that, the generational mind shift. We're a part of that. That's happening right now as we speak, as evidenced by your appearance here today, right? It's happening now. The good thing is that Ariel's study also said that this perspective around participating in the stock market is changing. It's changing. And now 67% of black folks are investing. That's huge. Primarily, a lot of that is coming through our participation in our 401k plans and retirement plans, but that's good because now we're cognizant of that fact, and we're learning this and we're doing this. And what's even more important, and I'll just give you a few statistics, y'all may not like it, but I really enjoy this part. But so in 1998, 57% of black people were investing in stocks or stock mutual funds. By 2010, that number had grown to 60%. And then today, it's at 67%, as I just discussed. And so that's huge for us. We're making progress very quickly. And then another indicator is that black folks tend to think of their homes as their best overall investment. So that perspective is also changing. No surprise, based on what we went through in the crisis, as also discussed. We are just so in tune. Our congresswomen know what's going on, right? So 61% in 2004 believed that your home was the overall best investment, and now that level is 37%. So it's changing. And so now the other fact that I'll give you is that only 28% of black folks in 2004 felt that stocks were their overall best investment, and now that number has increased to 41%. So what this points to for us is that we do have an opportunity to begin thinking about how we close the inequality in wealth gap and what that looks like as we continue to participate in the stock market more. So as we continue to think about this mindset shift around how we participate in the stock market, we actually have the opportunity to build wealth, but to also leverage those investments to social change. It's not a mutually exclusive proposition. And that's the problem, I think, a lot of times, and that's why we have this sort of conflict as it relates to doing good and making money. And we hear it all the time, if you're making money, you can't be doing good. How else can you do good if you don't? That's the accountant in me coming out. I got to press her back sometimes. So we have this dichotomy in our heads, but I'm here to say, and this is why I started doing this work, that you can absolutely do both. Absolutely do both. So, Terry, so the reality of it is that we are living in an environment where we have an opportunity to align our values and our money. We do that. We don't talk about it like that, but we already do that. When we talk about consumer spending, we talked about supporting black businesses, right? Because we believe in black businesses, so that's already our values coming through our spending habits. That's one way. But again, we can also do that from an investment way. We think about it too. When you talk about alignments of values and money, I actually think about that's another way, that's an accountant's way of describing tithing, for example, right? So don't go to church and say, Pastor Dory said I don't have to tithe, I just got to invest. Now, don't put that on me. However, but this concept isn't foreign to us as black people at all. We are used to putting our money with our values. It's now just becoming more in vogue as we're starting to see that come into the investment space. And so what we hear a lot of different terms for this. We hear socially responsible investing, impact investing, ESG, environmental social governance. So we hear all of these terms just to talk about what we've been doing all the time is putting your money where your mouth is, right? It's just another way of doing it. But the thing about doing it this way is that you have this whole corporate segment that you can actually influence by doing that. So the piece that's also important and why corporations are paying attention to this is that this industry has grown to $9 trillion. So we talk about our $1.3, $1.2 trillion, over $1 trillion purchasing power. We're now talking about $9 trillion of investing power that's focused on ESG, impact investing, social responsibility investing. So this is a big deal and a big tool that we need to start thinking about how we leverage better. So at the YWCA, we've been thinking about this a lot because again, We living longer, but I ain't living another 140 years, so I'm trying to hurry up, right? We're trying to actually fulfill our mission. You know, people say, oh, your mission is so aspirational, eliminate racism, empower women. I'm like, yeah, and that's what we're trying to do, right? But we're doing it from a different lens. We're saying, how can we do this leveraging every single piece of the marketplace? So in Chicago, my colleagues in the back are actually the brainchilds behind this and making sure that we connected on this. We're actually launching an investment product that absolutely combines what we care about as women and people of color to corporations. You all are hearing it first. As we speak, it's getting seeded right now to trade on Monday. So the fact is that the YWCA, we're not playing. We're not trying to just, we love doing the social, technically we don't love doing all the services we do because that means we're doing hard work. That means things are happening in the community. But as long as we need to, we're gonna do those things. But we also need to mess with this marketplace. We can't act like that we're going to do all this work here. We've been doing that for 140 years. We need to impact the marketplace and the system level as well. We need to do both. Drop the bottled water on that. We need to do both, and I mean it, right? The bottle fell. But we need to do both, and it's important that we do both because if we sit here in this whole marketplace and say we're just going to work with this over here, we're missing out on an opportunity to actually create systemic change throughout the entire thing that absolutely fuels the engines that we're talking about. So we worked in partnership with an organization called Impact Shares to create an exchange-traded fund on the New York Stock Exchange to focus on the issues that we care about. How we did this is that we actually took 19 different criteria. So they go with everything you've heard about, women on boards. And what's so unique about ours is women on boards and people of color. So we're trying to do both. I don't have time, we're trying to do both. So women on boards, people of color on boards. We're looking at that information. Women on boards, people of color in leadership. Women on board, women, people of color, women in leadership, as well as percentage of participation of women in the workforce. So this is how we get the large retailers too. So we're looking at that. So that's one element. Then we're saying, what are you doing with your workforce? Are you providing paid time off? All the things that you all are fighting for us in Congress for every day. Are you providing paid time off? Are you providing equal pay? We need Congress to enforce these laws for us, but they could do it anyway. They're choosing not to. So we're going to get them from all sides. We're saying, hey, we need you to follow regulations, and we also need you, because we're going to be your investors, telling you that these things matter to us. People pay attention when they understand what matters to who they're getting their money from. And so we're saying these things matter. So we're looking at not only the leadership of the organization, so we start to say women in power, we're also talking about empowering all women. So we're also looking at, so paid time off, equal pay, there's 19 of them. I don't have them all committed to memory yet. However, there's a lot. And the reason is because we can then, and we have, already leverage the data to rank companies and say who's doing well and who isn't. And this information actually just went live. Another Chicago company, Morningstar, published the index to say who's doing it and who's not. And so this is so exciting because for the first time, it gives us the opportunity to show up at shareholder meetings and say, Mr. CEO, what are you doing about equal pay? What are you doing about supply chain diversity? That's in there too. So we're asking people questions and we're holding them accountable by leveraging these tools because we absolutely have power in our dollars. We got the consumer thing down, even though we can coordinate a little more on that, but we still understand that that's a channel. Now we can leverage the investor channel to absolutely create change. So we're so excited because we are actually going to go to the stock exchange and ring the bell. And I invite our congresswomen to join us because what's going to happen is that black women are going to take over Wall Street. No offense to that little girl standing in front of the bull, but we were like, move over, sisters are coming through. But having said that, is that this is so important because this represents, the reality is we're going to make change. We're in a capitalist society, so why are we ignoring that fact? It's capitalism, so we need to play the game as well. But the reason, what we need to do is put tools out there so that we can play the game and play it well. And so that's our goal. So we want to just go up on Wall Street, and we hope that Becky call on us. That is our... Hey, there's some black women up here ringing bells. No, I ain't used to seeing that, and that's okay, because we're going to make it a regular thing. Actually, last month, the NAACP launched their Minority Empowerment Index. So we're starting to say, where are we? Leverage the capital market. We're lucky that we have Reverend Jackson here with Rainbow Push and his Wall Street project that he's been working on, talking to companies in a different way, but we needed to go a step further. We needed to actually become shareholders. And so this is the way we're going to do that. And we're creating products that are accessible and investable, and I'm not giving you investment advice, talk to your brokers about it, but I'm just saying that we need to understand what's out there because we have the power to shape what's out there, and we have a power to participate in that. So the last thing that I'll say is that at the YWCA, that we have a little saying that says doesn't work without the W. We're going to prove that to Wall Street as well. So thank you. Thank you very much, and enjoy the day, and I'll be hanging out with you all the rest of the day. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, ladies. Good morning again. I am Audra Wilson. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Robin Kelly, and so thank you so much for being here. I have better theme music than that, but that's all good. But thank you so much for bearing with us this morning. I know we got started a little bit late, so we're going to accelerate this program, but thank you for hanging in there because there's a ton of great information to give you. So we're going to go on actually to our first panel, and I want to have our panelists come up. So we have two panels that are going to follow. The first is called The Legacy of Black Wealth Building. And with this panel, we are honored by having Marcia Young Cantarella, who is the daughter of civil rights icon Whitney Young Jr., and so she'll be gracing us with her presence, and they're talking about the legacy of her father, along with our esteemed panelists. So our panelists are going to have you guys come up on the stage. Hold on one second there, Terry. Immediately following that panel, we're actually going to have Dory come back with another group of very dynamic women called Sisters on the Rise, RESPECT, Me and My Money, so you get the theme. And then we're going to have a brief Q&A with both panels immediately afterwards. And then we're going to break, and I'll let you guys know about our breakout session. So if you're able to stay and get some more information, we're happy to have you. There will be food available all throughout, because I know I promised I'd feed you guys. So I want to first introduce Alicia Tate, who is going to be your moderator for today. Alicia?
I think I'll stay down here if that's okay. Can people see me all right if I'm here? Do we need to move the podium? Okay. All right, we're good. Okay, well, good morning. I know, again, we started a little bit late, so we'll try to make up some of that time in this panel. But I think Dory did a wonderful job, as always, of framing the issues for us today, and in particular, she really did a great job of setting the stage for the conversations that we're having today. You know, getting that framework of where we are in the economy and the opportunities available to us as Black women is really where we want to point our minds. And so this discussion is going to fill out a little bit more of that context and foundation for really how to think about the empowerment of Black women and ergo Black communities economically. And so part of what we wanted to do was pull in part of the legacy of Whitney Young Jr. How many of you, any Whitney Young grads here? Any alumni? Okay. Always have to ask in Chicago. You know, so he was, to Dory's point, I mean, he was really at those seats of power and at those tables really pushing to open the doors for Black people in every setting. And for that, he was labeled an Uncle Tom by many. He was criticized by many in the Black Power movement that he was not radical enough and so on and so forth. But he had a vision of Black power, and you'll see this if you watch the whole, we're going to show some clips, but if you watch the whole film, he really talks about his vision of Black power was really self-determination. it's exactly what Dory was speaking to, that, you know, we needed to be in charge of our own destiny, including our economic destiny in every way. And this was his work. And all of the black CEOs who have followed him have credited him with opening those doors and in integrating black people into every part of the finance and business world. And also we'll see a little bit in the clip too about his work to not only open those doors in the business financial world, but like Dory said, you know, playing on both sides in the sense of opening up broad social programs and policies and pushing, in particular, the administration of President Lyndon Johnson to really promote programs that would benefit all black people and lift us out of poverty. So that's a little bit of a framework for the clips we're going to show. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful film. We're gonna see a few snippets from it, and then I'm gonna let Marcia talk a little bit about her father's legacy, and I'll introduce the rest of this wonderful panel, and we'll have a bit of conversation about it. Okay. Starting first with Marcia Young Cantarella, daughter of Whitney Young Jr., and she has a background in both corporate education, philanthropy, and we're really excited to have Marcia with us today. Christopher Reed, who has the rank of Professor Emeritus of History at Roosevelt University in Chicago. So Christopher, thank you for being here with us today. A frequent speaker on Black history issues in Chicago. Next to him, we have Brittany Robbins, who's the founder and CEO of the Gray Matter Experience, which works with young people to become entrepreneurs. Welcome, Brittany. And next to her is Danielle Harbison, who is Executive Director of Black Chicago Tomorrow, which is doing work to improve the economic circumstances for black people in communities in Chicago. Welcome, Danielle. And then last but not least, we have Bob Howard, who he's going to talk some about the history of black banks with us today, but he's also was a professor at Roosevelt for many years, and he and Christopher are both connected to the Black Chicago History Forum. So welcome, Bob. Okay. So, Marcia, let's start with you. I'm standing over here because I guess this side of the room, it was bad for this side of the room. So I'm not trying to act like I am smarter than any of the people on this panel. But Marcia, I know you speak a lot about your father's incredible legacy, and it's really a story that a lot of us don't know, even in Chicago, where we have a school named after him. And but I wanted to understand how he influenced you in your work. Both you and your sister, his children, have worked in philanthropy in a variety of ways to, you know, give back to the community. So can you share personally for you some of the lessons you got from him?
Yeah, I'll tell a little bit of my story, but I first want to say the extent to which I feel at home. You know, this is where my Aunt Arnita Boswell lived. Okay. Is that better? Is that okay? Better. Okay. So this is where, you know, Aunt Arnita Boswell lived. You know, I was delighted to get the message from Robin's office through my cousin, Jihan. Jim Compton, also my cousin, who, you know, was head of the Urban League, was his boss was my dad. So this is a whole family thing here. And of course, there's the magnet school, which I have visited with Arnita. So, you know, I want to tell, you know, my dad's influence a little bit through my own story. You know, as was mentioned, you know, he opened doors to the corporate world, and one of the ways that happened was through companies embracing a corporate social responsibility agenda. So when I graduated from Bryn Mawr, you know, one of my first jobs was at Avon, which was just beginning to create its corporate responsibility agenda. I had no idea what it was doing. We were making it up as we went along. But there was a community of us who were all doing this work, and we were all, you know, kind of working together. And I was kind of struggling to make my way up the corporate ladder, and became friends with a senior vice president at Chase Bank. David Rockefeller at Chase was on Daddy's board, and the senior vice president at Chase, Francesco Cantarella, became kind of my mentor and ultimately my husband. Francesco actually proposed at an Urban League dinner. But he's the one who taught me how to navigate this white male space, right? So we are, an interracial and integrated family. But he had to teach me how to do that stuff because I had no clue. But the way that happened was that my dad used to take his board and he'd put them on buses and he'd take them to Harlem and he'd take them to Bed-Stuy so they could actually see the impact of poverty. And that was eye-opening, and so then they became part of the Urban League and part of what was then the National Urban Coalition, and the National Minority Purchasing Council evolved during this period. All of that stuff began to happen in the 70s, even after my father wasn't there. After Daddy died, my mother ended up serving on 2 corporate boards. As did one of my Avon colleagues, Joyce Roche. So opening board seats was part of his legacy. I went to work for a while, when I left Avon, I'd moved from corporate responsibility and marketing. There were a whole series of layoffs. When I had to lay off 20% of my staff, I was like, I'm done. And so I started doing some consulting. I worked at Catalyst simultaneously with working at NYU. Catalyst was working on women's issues and what was happening to women in corporations, including women of color. And while working at NYU, all of a sudden the education gene kicked in. The fact that I had grown up, I spent my summers on the Lincoln Institute campus, that I'd spent, part of my life at the Atlanta University campus. This felt like home. So I stayed at NYU, earned my doctorate with a focus on American studies, American business in American studies. So that's my universe. And then I went to Princeton where I was a dean, and my boss was actually Nancy Weiss-Malkiel, who had written one of the biographies of my father. Mm-hmm. So, all of these pieces kind of flow and fit together. One of the things I also did in my corporate life is that, the whole question of equal pay and the impact on people in corporations was a result of Daddy's work and the Equal Employment Opportunity Act and the Equal Pay Act. I had enough political science knowledge to write what sounded like a very legal memo to my senior colleagues at Avon about our vulnerabilities as a company. And one outcome was that a bunch of us got raises, right? So I took that information to them and that data to them and said, yeah, this is what we look like, and here's what it could cost you. Right? So we have these ways of empowering people and getting information to people. I can stop there, or I can go on.
Well, let me ask. I mean, you mentioned in your own life and work how you've specifically focused on Black women and opportunities for Black women. Mm-hmm. Any other lessons from your father's legacy that you think are specifically applicable for us as Black women?
Well, I think one of the things that also, all of this legislation happened at the same time, right? So the Equal Pay Act and also Title IX were in the same year. Mm-hmm. Right after, enacted right after Daddy's death. And President Nixon actually spoke at Daddy's funeral. So there was some softening there that made it possible for that legislation to happen the year after Daddy died. Title IX, people think of it now in terms of sexual harassment. Mm-hmm. But it also, and maybe primarily, was meant to make sure that women had equal opportunity in terms of athletics. And what that did in terms of a sense of women's empowerment, I think we're now at a place where we're seeing some of the ramifications of that. When I was a dean at Princeton, part of my job was to groom students for things like the Rhodes and Marshall and Fulbright and stuff. The Rhodes was a fellowship that was created for white men scholar athletes, right? Eventually they dropped the white men part, and then after Title IX, they dropped the scholar athlete part. So, because they assumed that women wouldn't be able to compete on that level. Well, the year I left Princeton, I had 4 Rhodeses and 3 Marshalls, and that was the moment for me to leave because that was never going to happen again. And 4 of those were women, and they could have competed on the scholar athlete platform, right? So there is this women's empowerment that, in a subtle way, Title IX helped to create. My father spoke at my college graduation, and our class was an activist class. We were turning things upside down at that campus. But I think it's no accident that one of the people who was turning things upside down was Drew Faust. Drew Faust has just left the presidency of Harvard with 4 black women deans, right? So there was that impact. As I said, there are women who are serving on boards now that never would have happened if my mother hadn't been able to serve on boards, primarily because she was the widow. And that was a lot of women who went on to boards and other positions because they were the widows of. But once they opened that door, then it became a question of power. And the last thing was, in the presentation previously, we saw where the dollar value of the black community is now being recognized. When in the 60s and early 70s, there was a guy named D. Park Gibson who was a public relations guy. He wrote a book called The $3 Billion Negro about the purchasing power. We're now looking at $9 trillion, right? And paying attention to that and opening that possibility was work my father did, as well as opening the doors to institutions of higher education, where, he grew up with powerful women, his sisters and his mother. He was always surrounded by powerful women. And what women have done in taking advantage of those opportunities has been extraordinary. So, I think, he laid that groundwork. He allowed leadership to develop. He allowed me to be, he was very good about, taking me with him to events. I stood up. He put me in a position to argue with the Undersecretary of State about the Vietnam War because Daddy couldn't take a position on the Vietnam War. But I had been at teach-ins at Bryn Mawr, so I knew about the Vietnam War. Daddy just said, here's what my daughter thinks, and then he left me. So I always had that sense of empowerment. And so that's, and my sister heads the Colorado Women's Foundation. And Congresswoman Clark, I have got to introduce you to my stepdaughter, Mara, also a graduate of Bryn Mawr, who led a panel at Bryn Mawr wearing her Nasty Woman t-shirt. She is in Brooklyn. She is a political animal, and she needs to know you.
Okay, thank you, Marcia. Thank you. And I want to move on to Christopher. I neglected to also say, though, that I'm here representing the leadership team of Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy, and we would love to have any of you join us as members. It's a group that's really dedicated to looking at just how we increase investments in our communities, and I left information on the table, or you can talk to me after. But I love how you connected, Marcia, all the different worlds, the policy world, the corporate world, the community world. So Christopher, I'm wondering if you can talk with us a little bit about how Young's lessons apply to Chicago and where we are at as a city in Chicago. And one of the tensions I always saw in his story and his approach was that tension between, the inside and the outside game, the thing Dory kind of alluded to. How much are you being an activist and pressuring, and how much are you trying to moderate and compromise? Can you speak to that a bit?
Speaking
You
briefly.
You have to hold that mic closer.
A little
Maybe
closer,
even just
okay.
hold it in your hand.
Yeah, speaking briefly. Can you hear me? Yeah, deliberately speaking briefly. Just
you.
a couple of minutes. I want to share our time with Bob Howard. And we're representing the DuSable Museum through our organization, the Black Chicago History Forum. I'd like to piggyback on something you said, and it had to do with negotiating the space that white males controlled. Now, answering you directly, Black Chicago was always aware of the need to use its dynamism to negotiate that space.
Mm-hmm.
So being both insiders and outsiders, they moved forward. 100 years ago, to work as insiders meant that the powerful politician from New York would come to Chicago. In the 1880s, Ed Wright enlisted the aid of men and women to create a political organization in the first congressional district that what got black people on the inside of what was going on, where they could make policy and affect the wage earning and salaries of blacks in government. Let me say that by the 1920s, because there were so many blacks in city hall employment, the opposition to blacks called City Hall Uncle Tom's Cabin. Too many blacks, and they worked to get blacks out. But blacks were there working from janitresses, clerks, secretaries, up to what? Higher level positions. And that was because the first congressional district pushed people into municipal government. They also had influence over federal and state government. So the role of the insider is important. At the same time, blacks were pressuring the system from the outside. And one way you do that is by what? Increasing your power as consumers. Your electoral block has to be strong. That was being done. And in talking about women increasing their purchasing power, we have to look at 3 organizations in Chicago. I'm going to be very brief. I'll just mention Annie Malone with Poro College. And if you've been over on King Drive and you've seen the new Defender building, think in terms of that half of that block being owned by a black woman out of Indianapolis. Now, when Annie Malone came here, teaching women how to make money from making beautiful women already more beautiful at beauty shops, okay? She was promoting black women to go into self-employment. At the same time, you had Madam C.J. Walker's operatives in Chicago. But at the same time, historically, it's documented, you had Anthony Overton, who had the Overton Company basically being run by women. Now, the Overton building still stands at 36th Place and State. His name was on the building. But there were a great many women running his manufacturing operation, making high brown powder for women and other things. And women ran his newspaper, the Chicago Bee, which previously had been a magazine. And they advertised products that were being produced by women. He happened to have, and I want to stop, he happened to have no sons, if I remember correctly, and all daughters. And the daughters became operatives in the business as soon as he arrived in Chicago in 1911. The key here is, though, women were becoming self-employed and were moving away from domestic and service operations. And in doing that, we're increasing their purchasing power. Combine that with what? The insider, and you start making some progress.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I have to say that was so well said when you said beauty shop, making beautiful women more beautiful.
Well,
we appreciated that. That was very nice. Thank you.
But notice the deliberate title for those operations. Yeah, not ugly shops.
Right. Right. Well, that's a perfect segue to go to you, Brittany. I want to hear some examples of, share some examples of what's happening on the ground in Chicago. But you're all about entrepreneurship and empowering, in particular, young people. Talk a little bit about your work, and particularly your work, with young women.
For sure. Just for some context, the Gray Matter experience works to expose Black high school students to entrepreneurship and allow them the opportunity to create businesses that impact South and West Side communities. So we've been doing this work since 2016, and really truly believe that it is our job as a community to empower our youth to get ready and prepare them to have a seat at the table, and really equip them with the knowledge that a lot of us are just learning, right, about our communities, about our purchasing power, about the opportunities that exist for us to create and empower our own communities. It's important for us to be advocates for that to our children and to the youth. So a lot of the work that Gray Matter does is really the same knowledge that we're learning today about our purchasing power and about investing in stocks and about creating wealth and generational wealth, teaching that to our students very early on and really empowering them to take that knowledge and create businesses that in turn will allow them to employ people of their communities and really help create economic stability within underserved and Black and brown communities across the city. And so a lot of our constituents, a lot of our students are women and young girls from across the city. I think 55% of our students are women and girls, and so a lot of what we do is really empowering them to, again, have a seat at the table and equip them with knowledge, resources, and access to be able to withstand the economy that we're building, in addition to creating an opportunity for them to meet mentors and see people that look like them doing the work, and really empowering them to understand that this is an opportunity for them to take, not when they get a certain age, not when they have a certain income level, not when they reach a certain education status, but that's something they can do right now on the ground, and really creating a community where we can help them build that, so that in turn we see businesses that are created within our Black communities being able to withstand economic stability, being able to create sustainability for their families, and being able to provide that generational wealth that we all talk about.
Can you give us a couple of examples of some of the business ideas that they are creating or working to create?
Yeah, so last fall we launched 2 businesses. The first one is called Lip Locker. It's an organic do-it-yourself lipstick company for minority women. But the most powerful one is Recruiteen, and so it's a GPS-enabled app that allows teens to find jobs within their communities. And so they're really trying to target and focus on the unemployment rate for Black teens, and really giving them opportunities to have that first job and start building jobs within their communities. This fall we'll be launching an additional 6 businesses that range from Black business directories allowing Black businesses to have an online presence, to a teen business directory that's allowing teens to have access to a new market of customers. We have a cryptocurrency Bitcoin trading app that allows teens to trade digitally within one digital wallet, and a couple others that are coming out of the program. And so we're continuing to try to equip our students with, like I said, knowledge, resource, and access to have a seat at the table, early on.
And how can people here help support what you're doing?
Yes, absolutely. We have tons of volunteer opportunities, tons of mentor opportunities, and tons of opportunity for you to donate and give into these students' businesses and to the organization. You can visit our website, which is graymatterexperience.com. That's gray with an A, or find me after, and I'm happy to give you guys more information. And just a quick plug, we will be opening applications up for our next cohort of students mid-September. So if you know a high school student between the ages of 15 or 18, or a freshman to senior, please do direct them to our website to apply, because it really is a fantastic opportunity for students to really get in on the ground level and learn about their power as a teenager and what they can do here and now.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah. So, okay, Danielle, take us back to the community aspect of this. Talk a little bit about Black Chicago Tomorrow, what you're doing in specific communities to really increase community assets overall and increase that self-determination in those communities.
So I think I'm Danielle, and I run an organization called Black Chicago Tomorrow. Our focus, or our vision, is creating vibrant African American communities here in Chicago that contribute to and also benefit from kind of the regional economy. So the vision statement talks a lot about economics. The fundamentals of how we go about doing this work is broader than pure economics. So we actually believe there's kind of 6 things that kind of get you back to that kind of thriving economic component. You do have to obviously think about generational wealth transfer and how people are generating that wealth. You have to think about where people have access to jobs. So what can we do not only in the community, but where there is an epicenter of where those jobs, or I should say typically higher paying jobs, are located. And in this city, that's downtown. But we also have to think about how the community looks, and so the infrastructure, how are we connecting people not only within that community, but how are we connecting them to the surrounding community? So access to transportation, bus lines, metro stations, all of those things are extremely important. So we think about economics, we think about community development, we think about the family structure. So one of the things that I'll talk a little bit about is obviously most of the families that are on the west and the south side are being led by females, whether that be the mom or that be an aunt or be a grandmother. And so we have to think very much about the support structures that are in place to allow people to be successful. We think about health, education, and kind of the violence piece. So we've got kind of 6 prongs of how we do this work, and we then think very much about how you kind of bring all those things together. So we think very much about kind of place-based, which is the work that we're currently doing in Auburn Gresham. It's about getting really hyper-focused, understanding what's happening in that community, and how we can apply those kind of 6 pathways that I talked about in that space and kind of support them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we also then think about the fact that a lot of what we see on the ground is driven by a policy, a law, some practice that's already in place or has been in the place that's continuing to exacerbate what we see on the ground. So we have to be hyper-focused. We've got to deal with what we're seeing on the ground, but we also have to deal with kind of this kind of larger, broader piece of this work. And then we've got some other stuff that we're working at too, so I'm happy to talk about it. It's pretty complex. So from kind of what we're doing in Auburn Gresham and how we think about economics, one of the things that the research has kind of shown for us is that you have to actually focus in on kind of big catalytic projects. And so while we think about how we drive community, it has to be community-led. So everything that we do is really based off of what the community has said that they wanted. They've done tons of plans, but they're not funded. And so we've got to fund the work that has already been done. And then we've got to pick out from that what are the big catalytic things that drive the momentum in that community and kind of accelerate the momentum and the change. So we're looking at projects that are usually $10 million plus. So we currently have about $45 million worth of investment in that community right now, with more projects in the pipeline. And so for us, kind of getting back to that economic stability is fundamentally about being focused on what the community says that it wants and supporting it where it says that it needs these things now, and then trying to figure out how we continue to create kind of like a cascading effect, right? How do we kind of keep these things going? From kind of this individual perspective of how we think about women, one of those things that also means that we have to think about like daycare centers in the community, and how we're ensuring that the right supports are there, how we're helping families who oftentimes have some legal struggles. Maybe a son or a grandson or a granddaughter or daughter has gotten touched by the criminal justice system, and so we have to think about how we remove the barriers to that employment. So it's really hard oftentimes to get a job if you've been arrested, let alone been convicted. And so we've got to remove the barriers that are in place. And so we're trying to kind of tackle it from all different levels. But that's how we kind of think about really bringing a community up, is to kind of hit it on all of those things, support it where it says it needs to, where it believes it's at right now, and kind of help raise the community itself.
So where does the money come from for you to do your work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So our belief, or I guess I should say my belief in how you do this is similar to kind of what Dory showed before. We tap into foundations, we can tap into the government, but the truth of the matter is that a lot of the times, not only do we have the solutions for how our problems need to be solved, But we need to tap into where the money is. And the money in Chicago sits with businesses. And we have not historically tapped into that pot of money in the way that we need to. And so we believe, or I believe, that we can leverage the business community to drive this change, and that's what we've been doing. And that the way that we're doing that is kind of similar. I didn't know, I'm not from Chicago, so I didn't know the whole Whitney Young story, but very similar to this story. So I don't believe that we need to make a lot of waves. In fact, I do my best, as Alicia knows, to fly under the radar. So this is unusual that I'm sitting on this panel. We try to fly under the radar screen. And the reason is because we don't want to cause a lot of drama until we have made a big enough impact that it is really hard to stop. So $45 million is big. We'll probably be about close to $100 million by the end of 2019. That's a big investment in a community that oftentimes hasn't seen any investment. But I know it can also be very easily stopped. And so we try to leverage the board. My board is made up of either current CEOs of Fortune 100 companies or retired CEOs. There's a lot of conservative voices on that board, and there's a lot of liberal voices on the board, which makes them for really great discussions. But they're committed to trying to do something different in this city, and we leverage their Rolodex. That's essentially how I make that happen, is by having them call their friend and get that meeting, having their friend, because they golf with them or they live next door, or their wives or friends, to write a check. And so it makes it, I don't know if it's scalable, I don't know if it's sustainable, but it's working right now. And we're going to try to continue to see if we can use that as a way to kind of set like a model for how we do this work differently. But it is about tapping into the resources that are currently available, and in a lot of ways literally leveraging relationships that people have that we as Black people oftentimes don't have access to.
Right.
So that's kind of how we leverage this.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a really great segue to you, Bob, in terms of this question about our institutions and how many institutions do we need to create that are run by us and serving our communities. You have done a history of Black-owned banks, which is an unfortunate story in Chicago. Talk a little bit about the importance, in your mind, of us creating those institutions versus the approach that Danielle laid out about leveraging, the power brokers, as discussed in the film.
Well, before I get to that question, I just want to reflect on a timeline that I didn't really know existed. I'm Harvard Business School class of '62. Last year, 2017, Harvard Business School celebrated the 50th year of the first female graduates from Harvard Business School in 1967, I think so. And they entered in '65. So I think that timeline kind of goes with your dad's work. And I was never aware of that, so thank you for that. As far as Black banking, as you said, I think everyone knows that they've been a casualty in the economic cycle here, starting back in '08. Back in 2010, I looked in 2010, we had 34 Black banks nationally. We had a few left in Chicago. Now there's only one savings and loan in Chicago, Illinois Federal. It's not listed as Black owned and Black operated, which means it had to be 51% ownership.
Okay.
But that may be the case.
Very few.
Very few in the nation. There are only 18 left in the nation.
Wow.
And there are a couple of reasons for that. One of the major reasons is the Dodd-Frank regulation, which was supposed to protect us from large banks, but it impacted Black banks in the ability to operate because they have to hold more cash, and therefore created an issue with people wanting to invest in banks. And the other issue is that with the interest rates being so low, at a zero interest rate, that investors don't want to open up new banks. That's the bad news. The good news is there is one bank that I discovered through my work, and by the way, I'm not a banker. I was encouraged to do this work by Christopher Reed when I was doing some graduate work at Roosevelt. But One United Bank, I think, has the business framework or structure to be successful. And what they've done is they've gone to electronic banking. Their offices, I think, are in Boston, but they're represented in all 50 states. And they're the largest, now the largest black-owned and operated bank in the United States. And they're
One United Bank?
One
they're called?
United. And if you go online and do One United Bank, you can open up an account with them anywhere in the United States. And their president happens to be a female. I don't remember her name, but so the chairman is male and the president is female. So I think the way the economy is set up now, as the speaker for the Y said, in order to be successful, you have to be electronic if you want to be scalable. You have to be on the internet, and I noticed that a lot of our young people are creating businesses around private equity and venture capital, where you don't need a lot of human capital. You just need a few smart people, and we do have that. And so they are investing in those kinds of organizations. So I think my timeline kind of coincides with Whitney's work as well, and being a class of '72, and I was in corporate America. Back in those days, you were always the first. So I was the first senior VP for Payless Shoes, ran the Boys and Girls Club of Chicago. So I think that I tend to focus on the inside and the ability to negotiate and to work behind the scenes promoting people like me. I always had an executive assistant that looked just like me. And so I think I'm a big proponent of working from the inside, and I think you have to do well before you do good.
Okay. Thank you. Well, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the big takeaways from this discussion, right, is that there's no right or wrong answer.
Right.
That hitting this from a number of different angles is important, but it's important to not sit on the sidelines of any part of it. Like Dory charged us with, we got to be engaged at all levels. So we could go on and have a lot more conversation with this panel, but I'm trying to be a good moderator and follow my direction to wrap it up so we can keep it moving. So please help me in thanking these wonderful panelists. And with that, we're going to transition to our next panel, and then I think have some Q&A for both panels. We're going to try to have some Q&A following the second panel. Audra?
Thank you so much, Alicia. And to our panelists, can we give it another round of applause, please? And we really felt that it was important not only to be able to celebrate the legacy of Whitney Young Jr., to make sure you had the historical background and understanding, because it's really important to know from where we've come to figure out where we're going to go. So I'm now going to bring up our second panel, who will be moderated by our dynamic keynote speaker, Ms. Dory McWhorter. So while our panelists are getting on stage, I just want to remind you, immediately after we are finished with our second panel, and hopefully we'll have time for a very brief Q&A, we have 2 breakout sessions. So if you are inclined to stay, and we hope that you do, the first one is going to be BYOB, which is Build Your Own Business. And so we were excited that we're going to actually do that outside our lecture hall 103. So for those of you who are kind of aspiring entrepreneurs, those of you who have small businesses but really need some help to figure out next steps and business plans, that sort of thing, we have folks from the Chicago Urban League and the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurism and Innovation that are actually going to be doing that interactive breakout session. And so I'll tell you more about that when we're done. Our second section is how many millennials do we have in here? Can I call myself one?
wow.
No, okay. I tried. I'm a proud Gen Xer. It's okay. But for our millennials in here, you're going to stay in here because we're going to do something called 3M. Okay, so it's money management for millennials. And so I think it's going to be a very important subject for you. And so the whole purpose of this conference is to make sure you don't have to have money to be able to learn how to make some money and for yourselves and for future generations. So we're going to have you actually remain in here after we're all done. But without further ado, I'm going to bring up Dory. Thank you. So, yes, I give you till that one.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Audra, and thank you for the panel right before ours. I just love the conversations that we're having today. And so, again, when Audra was talking about this topic, I was like, okay, you know I'm a CPA, right? I got lots of wonderful black women in finance, and so was happy to be able to bring a distinguished group of individuals together because first of all, I think we need to understand that there are more sisters like this in finance than we know about, so be able to have them here today is so fortunate, and particularly when you see how much money they represent, I think it's a great thing as well. So what we wanted to talk about, so we were talking about panel, when we were putting our panel together, we were talking about panel topics and what we wanted to really focus on, and of course we were inspired by the Queen of Soul, particularly, and I wish I could sing, but I can't, so, but particularly when Miss Aretha talks about your kiss is sweeter than honey, and guess what? So is my money. We thought, so, and I didn't sing that on purpose, right? So we decided that we were going to name our panel Sisters on the Rise, Sisters Rising, RSPT. I can't spell now, right? That's why I focus on money, right? But RSPECT, thank you. Myself and my money, because that's what we want to see. We want to see the combination of that. Monica is now a psychologist and an empowerment coach who's particularly passionate about elevating women and helping female leaders unlock their EFS, which stands for Emotional and Financial Security, to make life better, career and leadership, to make better life, career, and leadership decisions from a healthy position of wealth, regardless of net worth. And then we have Miss Yolanda Daniel. Yolanda Daniel is a vice president and officer in the financial services industry. She's also a fellow of the 2017 class of Aspen Institute Finance Leaders Fellowship, and the founder and current board president for 8 Oak Development, a real estate development firm focusing on mixed-use retail and residential development in underserved communities. And I hope that she's going to share with us her insights about how real estate development and the community trajectory to wealth building are combined and linked. Then we have Miss Renee Manley. I call her my $1 trillion woman, and she'll tell you why in a minute. But Renee is the deputy director of SEIU's, so the Service Employees International Union, Strategic Initiatives Department, where she works with pension trustees, investment professionals, and union leaders around the engagement of multi-million-dollar union and public pension funds. It's actually it's $1.5 trillion that SEIU ensures gets invested property. And she's passionate about helping women understand how our relationship to money today impacts how we will live when we retire. I hope that she'll also talk to you about the wage gap and how that really impacts Black women's ability to save and invest, and the steps we need to take to eliminate this gap. And then finally, I have my friend, Ms. Corliss Gardner, and she is here representing the African American legacy of the Chicago Community Trust, which is a philanthropic and educational initiative led by African American and civic and community leaders who share the common goal of improving the quality of life among African Americans across the Chicago area. And I hope that you also talk about this general wealth building strategies and how philanthropy can be a part of how we invest in our community and society at large. So as you see, we have an amazing group of panelists, and I want to get right into this so that you can hear from them. And so what I'd like to do is first go down the line, but would like to know how each of you got involved with your particular field, as we talked a little bit about in your bio, and wanted to share some of your insight as to why this topic that we're having, the conversation that we're having today, is important. So why don't we start with you, Dr. Black?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dory. And I got to just say grace and gratitude for the energy in this room and everybody who has presented before. I have some things to share, but I've got to read through all my notes now that I've been taking from everyone else. So I appreciate that. To be honest, I went back to school to get my doctorate in psychology because I was running away from corporate America and back into my own soul. And I really thought that I wouldn't re-enter the space of corporate America once I graduated. But that's exactly where life took me, and then into finance, of all things. And so I just want to share this portion of a story. We were actually in New York at a focus group with about 15 high net worth, on average, 35 million. In the room. And here I am just graduating with my doctorate, so y'all know I had no money. No money. I was just trying to figure out how I was going to introduce myself and get myself through this conversation. And they were talking about their relationship with finance. And even my business partner, Carolyn Leonard, who was the first woman to trade in 1976 at the Chicago Board of Options Exchange, the first woman on the floor with her own money, her mentor was in the room. So these were leading women. And during that conversation, I watched one woman cry because she was now taking over the wealth of her family while her husband had been diagnosed with a chronic illness. I watched another woman stand up and just with sheer frustration talk about the fact that they couldn't find a financial advisor that would treat them with respect, even though she was one of the founding members of Goldman Sachs, founding partners of Goldman Sachs, and had all the knowledge in the world, but was treated as if, oh, sweetie, we'll take care of your money for you. I watched the third woman stand up and talk about the fact that ever since she was young, she had always been told that money was a man's game. And so in that room, they sat around the table and said, this problem is big, it's multi-pronged, I don't know what we're going to do about this. And of course, the little psychologist in me said, I know exactly what we're going to do about this. And so we started talking about the emotional before the behavioral side of finance. And that's really how I got into this. And so never did I think that I'd be back doing work with corporate America and in great partnership with corporate America, as Dory has mentioned, that we've got to find those levers and those bridges and make them happen, but also to bring a model that will put some soul back into the conversation of finance and money.
Thank you, Monica. So Yolanda, I want to talk about, you have a wide range of financial expertise to pull from, but I want to hone in on your real estate development and then hear why you specifically chose real estate as a pathway to wealth building. We know that the GI Bill allowed a lot of folks, not always our folks, to acquire homes and then leverage those homes to build wealth, and not only build wealth, but then transition that wealth to their seeds, and create that generational wealth. So I want to hear about why you're focused specifically around the real estate development area, and then any other pieces you want to share with us.
Certainly. So when I think about wealth and wealth building, there's think of it as a house, and underneath the house is the foundation, and you have all of the policies, federal, state, local policies that impact tax laws, and other property ownership and things like that. Sitting on top of that foundation, you have what I call community wealth. So that is the distributed wealth amongst all of us as citizens of this country, afforded to us. Medicare, Social Security, those kinds of things. The second tier are community health areas, and that's where you have nonprofits that we just heard of recently that help you provide a hand up to individuals. It's also public education and things like that. And then finally, it's individual wealth. And that's where I think of things in terms of the 3 I's. So there is inheritance that Dory talked about, and I'll speak a little bit about that. There is inheritance, there's your income, so what employment you have or what career you've chosen, and then the dynamics underneath that, which we talked about earlier, income disparity, doing the same work for different wages, and those issues. And then finally, investments, so how you invest in yourself, individuals, your businesses, and then there's real estate. And historically, as Dory had mentioned, well, even before the GI Bill, we weren't even, in many areas, allowed to even own property. So let's just even start there, you know. I'm from the South, and where, you know, there were a plethora of plantations, and even to this day, the legacy of land ownership has passed on and on and on to descendants of those who were not directly in our family. So we didn't control the land. Then you have opportunities for us in terms of real estate investment post the redlining period of the GI Bill, which, you know, allowed stipends or low interest loans to be afforded to individuals, you know, whites, not blacks, not Hispanics, not Japanese, not people, immigrants even, who came into the country. But what that GI Bill allowed was to provide one of the predominant ways in which wealth was built in the United States. So it allowed for individuals to pass down home ownership. It allowed to create equity and therefore create wealth within communities that don't necessarily look like us. So what real estate allows us to do, well, land ownership, first of all, is one of the core wealth contributors in the United States. And what land ownership does allows you to also create wealth through real estate development, which is a very keen interest of mine. My approach to it is that you look at it from a triangular partnership. So you have government, you have business, and then you have individuals as well, all together who combine. I don't know if you've heard of purpose-built communities, but these are communities that look at, similar to what the young lady here was just describing to us, but you look at education in a community, you look at health and wellness in the community, and then you look at home ownership, that being mixed use, retail, mixed use housing, different levels of income that allows people to have affordable housing, as well as, you know, your top dollar housing. So it's looking at bringing all those interests together with the common belief that you can do well by doing good. You can bring communities together, bringing together different kinds of people, but all wanting to have a rich and fulfilling life in order to, you know, again, to have great educational opportunities for the kids, to be able to walk the neighborhoods and, you know, after dinner, after, you know, you eat 10 slices of German chocolate cake and know that you can walk off those calories, but also have affordable health care in the neighborhood that's close to you. So those are just some of the different kinds of real estate opportunities that I look at when we invest in communities.
Great. Thank you for that. And then Renee, as we talk about, you know, we've heard a lot today about the wealth gap and the disparities around that. Would love to just hear how your focus on retirement and the access to retirement is so important in the conversation that we're having today as well. And then clarify the topic around the $1 trillion, because she's my $1 trillion woman.
So first of all, let me just thank the Congresswomen for having this event. This is amazing. And Dory for having the hosting the panel today. So when Dory talks about the $1 trillion, you know, I represent the Service Employees International Union, and we have plan participants on 55 public sector defined benefit pension funds. And on many of those, we also have members elected as trustees. We also have 19 Taft-Hartley funds, and the combined retirement assets on those funds is over $1.5 trillion. And I myself sit as a trustee on a $2 billion Taft-Hartley fund. Who'd have ever thought? We can talk about that later. And so, so as a union member, we spend a lot of time, really focused on how do we improve the lives of our members and on the communities where our members live. And, we want everybody to have a good wage and have good health care and have, a good life, right? And so it doesn't know, so when we look at wage disparities, it doesn't do us any good to have, somebody working the same job and one person is making, $12 an hour for doing that work and somebody else is making $9 an hour for that job. So everybody should be making the $12 an hour wage, right? That just makes sense, right? If you're doing the same work, you want to get the same pay for that work. And typically what happens, and I think one of the persons on the earlier panel mentioned this, right? That we come into the job and we're so happy to get the job. The Congresswoman mentioned that, right? We're so happy to get the job that we just take the job that's offered to us. And I think one of the things that was most empowering for me personally is I remember watching this YouTube video of Oprah, and she talked about one of her first jobs. She found out that she was being paid $10,000 less than the anchor person that was doing the same work. And I'm just like, if Oprah can get messed around on work, come on, y'all, really. And so as women, and especially as Black women, sometimes we don't think about the impact that has over our whole careers, right? So when you're 18, when you're 19, when you're 22, you don't think about the impact of being paid $1 less or $2 less or $3 less. But it really does have an impact that, exactly, the generational wealth, right? It impacts you over your entire career. Because not only does it impact, what you're able to save for that period of time, it impacts, your what you're able to negotiate later on, because so many jobs are looking at your salary history as you're negotiating your salary for that next job, right? And so we really do have to look at how are we looking at those wage disparities and how do we eliminate them. Now, I would say, the best way to eliminate wage disparities is to have a union at your job, right? If you're one of those people, right? Now, some of us are not in, you get a little bit better and you're out of that kind of union category. But what we want is for people who do the same job to have equal pay, so that we eliminate that. We eliminate that all of the racial and gender equity issues are just not off the table totally, right? So that we're able to save, we're able to eliminate, those disparities, and so that we all have an equal playing field. I mean, that's what we want.
Well, thank you, Renee. Thank you. She gets me so excited when I listen to Renee talk. I'm like, yes! Even that's why I get the union at the YWCA. So Corliss, I would love, the statistics say that we're really on the cusp of the largest transfer of generational wealth in human history. So over the next few decades, baby boomers, who are the richest generation in history, largely because of a lot of the things that we've been talking about right now, are about to transfer $30 trillion in wealth to their millennial and Gen Xer children and grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about philanthropy and the ability of philanthropy to create social change, a lot of that generational wealth ends up in philanthropic hands as well. And I know that you are really focused on this area in terms of African Americans leaving their legacy. So I want you to talk about what you're up to with the African American. How do we say that? What's the full name?
African American Legacy. Mm-hmm.
Like
African American Legacy. Yes. So
at the Chicago Community Trust, which is big.
Yes, at the trust, which is the city's community foundation. So. Just quickly, thank you for having me. Thank you, Dory, for recommending me for the panel, and Alicia. I see her in the audience. I've experienced money in a number of different ways. I've been in financial services for 28 years. So I've managed trust funds for very, very wealthy people that transfer their generational wealth to their family. I've worked in commercial lending where I've put together real estate deals that create generational wealth. I have worked in our philanthropy sector at my current organization. I work for BMO Harris Bank. So the corporate philanthropy space and how that impacts the community. And then as immediate past chair of the African American Legacy, doing a lot of work around community philanthropy and what that really means. And I'll pause for a second just to say that in addition to some other community work, I've just recently been appointed as a trustee of this great institution here, Chicago State University. So I'm so delighted to work with President Scott because this institution is extremely important to Chicago and to our students and especially to the Black community. So welcome to Chicago State University. The African American Legacy is a philanthropic organization that is led by African American community members, civic leaders around the city. And about 15 years ago, folks came together to say, let's think about how we can pool our dollars to collectively help our community. And what does that really look like? And how do we think about philanthropy? What is philanthropy? By the way, August is officially Black Philanthropy Month, and I don't know if you guys knew that. And Black Philanthropy Month is here to share with us, what are the many ways that Black people are philanthropic? Certainly money is one, but how many of us have loaned our cousins some money? Raise your hands, right? How many of us are buying school clothes or books for kids that are starting school this season? Raise your hands, right? How many of us help out Mrs. Jones down on the corner when she can't take out her trash or clean her yard? Raise your hands, right? So when we think about philanthropy, Black people are philanthropic in so many different ways for generations, and that's really what Black Philanthropy Month is here to teach us, to educate us about that. But the money is important. The money is important, as Danielle mentioned, because it actually does create scale, it moves the needle, and African American Legacy has come together to say, how can we pool our dollars together, whether that is $50, whether it is $5,000, bring all of those dollars together and think about how we can systemically make change for our community. So we have been doing that for 15 years at the African American Legacy, and we have distributed well over $5 million to the communities locally here in Chicago, Black communities on the south and west sides of Chicago, and that's how we get folks engaged in philanthropy, not only from the dollars perspective, but also how can we activate around what we know is important to our community. How do we get people involved and get them to think about their philanthropy more expansively?
Well, that's wonderful. And so we were very intentional putting this panel together because we wanted to talk about sort of the full use of how capital flows and how we participate in that. So I'll start back with you, Monica, because the importance, it's interesting because I always hear people, we have these conversations internally as well as part of what we're working at the YWCA is how do we help women achieve economic sustainability. And people are like, well, people just need to do this or just need to do that. But it's not just about just doing something, because there's an emotional connection that we have with money. And so I want you to talk about that explicitly, and you talk about emotional and financial security. How are those things connected, and what are you seeing, particularly around the Black community, and how this emotional relationship with money is impacting wealth building?
Absolutely. So emotional and financial security is the sense that you have enough to live the life that you want, right? That you're not going to outlive your money. That's where the fear factor comes in. So let's start there. We say it's the emotional before the behavioral. And if you look at it from a psychological perspective, it's your cognitions that drive your behaviors. So a lot of times in high finance, we talk about the behavioral components, but we've really got to walk it back to the emotional, especially as women, because that's where we live. If we look at how we are often stereotyped in broader society, that we are more emotional, we are nurturing. Now they tried to use it against us, but I'm going to reclaim that because I think that those are beautiful skill sets that allow us to be philanthropic and to do the things that we do, but to do it with that soul in the heart so that it contributes to ourselves, our families, and our communities oh so well. So here's the thing. In the research that, after I left that focus group, because I grabbed my business partner's hand, Carolyn, and I said, start the car. And I said, I know what we're going to do. So I came back to Chicago. So we had conversations with over 50 leading women in Chicago. And the questions were just, what is your relationship with money? Talk to us about your relationship with finance, the good, the bad, the ugly of it, okay? For many of the women in the room, it was the first time that they had publicly talked about their relationship with money. Here's what we learned. 3 things. 1, women carry past, present, and future with them at all times. So I love that.
That was a collective.
Okay, yes.
We know.
I love that. So here's the thing, is that really factored into that relationship with money and your financial institutions? So I'm going to go back to something you said, Dory, and others have echoed. 1, it requires this mindset shift, right? But at the core of where we got that mindset are our key money messages, which is where we learned, really, somebody told us that nonprofit good, corporate bad. And it's like, who told us that? And then how many times was it echoed in our minds and for how long? And so then a lot of people were also told, how many people have heard that money is the root of all evil, right? So on top of, I love it, love of money. So on top of not being encouraged to go into STEM, we were also told that money was evil, but yet we were supposed to somehow economically, right, because we're all super women. Although I did put my cape up and I took it to dry cleaners that's in the back of the closet. I now get paid to be a superwoman. But so I say that because we were doing all that on top of these negative money messages and expected to change the world. And I understand where it comes from, but I think that that's a lot to ask of our soul. So the reality is oftentimes when we walk into financial institutions or we have conversations about money, it's not our whole self, our adult woman who shows up. Oftentimes it's our little girl. And our little girl was either told these negative messages and unfortunately in some circumstances, horribly wounded around money. And so those stories, we have to start telling them for our own selves and for each other so that nobody feels that they're left alone anymore. Because every woman we've had this conversation with has an incredible story. From not understanding your relationship with money because your father passed away when you were 9, and so you haven't been able to figure out how to change your money mindset out of one that, life is to be lived every day to now I actually want to invest for my future. So it's these really simple behavioral pivots that we need to make, but behind it is our life and our emotional well-being. So that's number 1. The second one is that women carry a much broader care network than men do on average. I expected a for that one too. I'm just gonna say, y'all. Okay. Now, I usually don't have a problem being loud, so let me put my maximizer on and step it up. So, women have a larger care network than men. Yes, there we go.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, so if you think about the average financial plan and how many people are factored into that financial plan, the reason why women don't often believe the number that comes out that would say this is how much you need in order to feel financially secure is because oftentimes that number is built on your core family, however you define that. Your partner, your kids, maybe you've worked in 1 or 2 parents, maybe. But if you ask your soul, how many people do you feel emotionally and financially responsible for? How high does the number go? Too many. So when we do this work in diverse audiences, we do talk, on average for white women, you might still get into the 6 to 8 range. For women of color, you get into the 8 to 10 very quickly, regardless of age, regardless of net worth. And in fact, for lower levels of net worth, or just different states of being, because I don't want to institute some sort of hierarchy into this, for a lot of communities that are under-resourced, the number has gone up to 20. 20. I did a presentation in Austin, and the room's response on average was 20, regardless of age, and there were teenagers in the room. I just want to share this because it really impacted me that this young woman had come to this brilliance on her own. In clarifying this and asking the same question I asked you, how many people are in your care network? After listening to the 20s, she said 1. And I said, so how did you get to 1? Because I'm like, that's a really interesting number. She said, I finally realized I had to choose myself. She wasn't, and she said, I realized that for all the energy I was giving out, I was never going to sustain it. It was an unsustainable model for herself, and so she had to choose self and choose one first so that she could build up her economic sustainability and wealth model so she could even think about generational wealth, so that she could think about the community causes. She had to right-size her own ship. And so she had been doing that. She said it had been taking her about 10 years at that point, but she knew she was coming to a close because she had to go all the way from high school to going to graduate school. That was the journey that she chose for herself for economic sustainability. And so that's what it means, the power of that care network. And so when we talk about past, present, and future, sometimes that triggering in the room, that little girl shows up, and then the weight that she feels is the weight of the care network. And that's oftentimes why we don't sleep at night. So the third...
So we are all getting group therapy right now. We are all like, yes.
yes.
So her cards are available later, but I'm just noticing that this is healing that's happening in the room.
Well, and this is what happens when we can bring psychology into finance, right? Yes. And don't we all live here? Yeah. So, right there, that's right. So the final thing that I want to share with you is the bag lady effect. Some of you all may have heard of that. I mean, it's not Erykah Badu's version of bag lady, but it kind of is. So it's that sense that you could lose it all. It's, say it again, sorry. Oh, I've just never been told I was quiet. Okay, so I'm going to sit still and be clear. The final one is the bag lady effect. And it's not the Erykah Badu bag lady, but it kind of is. Okay? The bag lady effect is the sense that you could lose it all tomorrow. Now, here's the thing. Going back to Oprah had a conversation with J.K. Rowling, in which J.K. Rowling asked Oprah, do you finally realize that you've made it, that you have enough? And Oprah's response wasn't, yes, I know I've got it. The response was, I realized that I could not make that many mistakes to go back to zero. And just pause on that. Because I think even what Dory offers and what the YWCA is doing is flipping the mindset to more of a strengths-based mindset, so that we're not focused on building from scarcity. Just think about what we keep asking ourselves, to think about the scarcity mindset and to go from a -10, sometimes a -20, all the way up to a sense of empowerment. Again, it's a lot to ask of your soul. The shorter route would be flipping the mindset to strengths, realizing and choosing, as that young woman did, that you are worthy, knowing your worth, and from there building a platform through all the financial mechanisms that are available that align with your values and align with your goals and your intentions in the world. So for the bag lady effect, this is one thing that I've noticed in our work. Actually, women of color, and in particular African American women, tend to have a lower bag lady effect. Why? Because we've actually done the work. We know, because a lot of us had to get our hustle on to get where we're going. So while we may feel that our economic empowerment, we know that there are barriers there that we still need to work on, the sense that we might lose it all tomorrow is a little bit less. And I'm just going to keep it real as my better half, who turned to me and said, because he tends to stress out a little bit in the 1 to 3 month mark, that's his emotional financial security as a first generation immigrant in this country. And there's a whole story behind that we've unlocked for him. But as he turned to me and he said, well, Monica, what are we going to do in 1 to 3 months if something should happen? I said, well, sweetie, I'm going to hustle like I do every day. Well, I was like, are you not understanding who I am? So, and I mean, I'm at this point standing up going like, come on now. You know I'm going to do A, B, C, and D, and I got the backup plan and the tertiary plan, so we'll be fine. It's not that I want to activate and live from here anymore. But what I do want to say is from the strengths-based mindset is I got this. And I know that I will figure out the rest of it. And I might need to choose myself first for a moment. So community and family, can y'all give me some space to do my work so that I can be of service to you in the long run. But I need to be at a place where I can bring my whole self to this conversation. I can remain fully present, aware of my past, but yet still able to forecast all of that future forward for myself, for my community causes. So those are the three underpinnings of really that emotional financial security that women have. And it's very different from the male mindset, which tends to live on the, money is the end goal. There's a number out there, I want to get the number, I get the house, I get the car, hopefully I keep my family. Just gonna pause on that. So the opportunity is to really embrace and put forward at Diamond, which is what I run, the boutique consulting firm I run with Carolyn Leonard. What we focus on is building a new table. Because the boys' table in finance, it hasn't even been inclusive of all men, to be quite frank about that. And so we're gonna just build it as we know how to build it as women, and then show the guys how to do it. So get rid of the boys' club, it's now called Girls' Club. But everyone is really welcome at that table. And so even in our model, as we unpack these conversations, the first questions that we get back from finance are, does this work for men too? And two things that we say, well, are men human? It's just that simple. And two, diversity done well just really works better for everyone.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you. So we have a lot to unpack in the next 20 minutes, and so I want to make sure that I get these other perspectives in, because Yolanda, I want to circle back with you for a second around what you are looking at by being an Aspen Finance Fellow. What does that mean, and what are the types of projects that you're specifically looking at that you feel will inform the Black wealth conversation?
Certainly. So what we've been talking about a bit here is when you have it, what do you do? And what I'm focusing on is how do you get it? And, I'll give you a couple of statistics that are some similar themes that you've heard from the Congresswomen and Dory this morning. That is 228 years. That's the number of years it would take for the average Black family to build the wealth of a white family. Okay. 228 years. Based on Institute of Policy Studies research. Another is by 2053, the median wealth of Blacks is estimated to be 0. So if we do nothing in an economy where the wealth gap is widening, what is our future really, right? And so what I am specifically focusing on is access to credit and access to capital, right? So when we think about access to credit, some of it is financial literacy. So there are some nonprofits here in the city that are looking at immigrant and minority communities, specifically African American and Latino communities, and just helping them to understand what does credit mean, right? What does credit mean? Thin files, meaning you really don't have anything in your credit history. No file, you don't even register with the 3 credit reporting agency. Is just as detrimental as bad credit, right? And so some of the things that we're looking at Aspen is alternative credit scoring. Right? Everybody pays their rent. I don't care if it's Section 8. Everybody pays their rent. Everybody pays a phone bill. Everybody pays, a car note. People go to work. All of these things that are indicators of our credit worthiness, and especially in minority communities where we might not have the platinum card or we might not have a credit card at all. But all of those factors, help to help organizations understand that you are worthy, or we are worthy for credit. And, I'm just one generation removed. My parents were first generation college graduates. My grandparents were sharecroppers, right? So I had a grandmother who knew that education was the key. I had a father that knew that education was the key, but he also knew that financial literacy was the key as well, right? So understanding, what it means to have a checking account. It doesn't mean just because you have more checks, you have more money, right? It doesn't necessarily translate in that way. And so, access to credit, again, there are many experience and proof of concepts going on where these communities have been taught how, about, how to build a credit portfolio. And their credit in the 3 to 6 months raises 100, 150 points. And here's the wonderful thing about it. It lasts, right? And so now you have untapped resources that you didn't have before. You have the opportunity to go out and fund your, food truck, or to fund your consulting firm, or to fund your beauty shop, right? Those are opportunities and knowledge that we need in order to help build wealth in our communities. Access to capital. Generally, our communities don't have the knowledge of where capital lies. Doesn't understand, I'll give this bit of a factoid. So Harvard did a study, and it showed that the post-recession, most real estate, specifically residential, had regained its value, except for African Americans. Our values in our homes and real estate is back to 1983. Right? Part of the driver for that is access to capital. Well, if you don't have access to fix that to get a loan, to fix that roof that's leaking, right? If you get a little bit behind and you don't have an opportunity to refinance your mortgage, right? If you're in an area where the rents are rising and you don't have an opportunity to originate a loan, and so access to capital is important. Retail financial institutions have shown, this is a recent Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago together with Urban Institute did a study that showed that small dollar mortgages, and these are mortgages anywhere from the $70,000 to approximately $150,000, $200,000. Financial institutions just don't care, because it costs just as much money to service a $50,000 mortgage as a $500,000 mortgage. And so guess where they're going to go and spend their time, right? So access to capital is another area that I'm focusing on. And putting those two together, it's really how to drive capital and education around credit into communities where we have been disserviced. Right?
Thank you. So Renee, and I'm going to ask Renee a question, but I'm going to tee up Corliss to actually be able to bring us home. And I'm going to put this on you, Corliss, because I believe you can do this. Because we've heard a lot of statistics and data today. And so I'm going to leave this with you so you can think about this while I have Renee ask her question. What's the silver lining in all of this? Because I know you have one for me. So Renee, I want to ask you just to share with us as we talk about retirement, because we've heard about all the different challenges, but what would you tell us 3 things or however many things that you think that women can do to be able to prepare for retirement?
You got to start wherever you are.
Yeah.
however old you are, you got to start saving now. You got to start thinking about it now. So some fun facts, startling facts, reality checks. First of all, I think the question that you asked about how many folks have, or somebody asked about, oh, you asked it, Corliss, about how many folks had, were the cousin that lent somebody money. So if you were that person, you raised your hand, you probably the bougie cousin, all right? They might not say it to your face,
But they're saying it.
but
They're
you
saying
probably
it.
are the bougie cousin, right? But let me say, only 41% of black females have any retirement savings, right? And if you do have retirement savings, the average black family has about $22,000 in retirement savings. How far is that gonna get you in Chicago? All right? Only about 12% of black senior citizens has a pension, right? Has a pension. And so I know I represent SEIU members. Our members are not the ones y'all see in the papers with the $100,000 pensions. Our average member has a pension of about $25,000, and most of our members do not get Social Security. Just saying, right? Our members are not getting rich. So if you in your 30s, you in your 40s, even if you're in your 50s, people say, well, you should have started saving when you were in your 20s. It's never too late to start saving. It's never too late to start saving. Start where you are. And for my millennials who are always talking about you don't know if Social Security is going to be there for you, I don't know if it is or if it isn't. But I will say this, 70% of working black millennials have no retirement savings. So you may not be all of that you think you are. Just saying. And 30% of black millennials have no access to employer-sponsored retirement plan. So that means you don't have access to a retirement-sponsored plan, so you have to look outside a traditional retirement vehicle. You have to save it on your own. Right? So you got to start somewhere. You got to start saving your money. You know. And when we start looking at that whole generational wealth transfer thing, I know one of the reasons millennials aren't saving is because you got all that student loan debt. Yeah. So hey, how many of y'all got millennials staying at home with y'all because they got student loan debt? Just saying. Right. So
Tell it, Renee.
So this whole idea of how we have this whole network that, and how we are responsible, how we are a village and how we have to take care of each other is real, right? But we have to have those hard conversations in our family about what this money means and how we're taking care of it. We have to have those conversations in our family about money. Right? What happens when to Big Mama's house? When Big Mama goes, right? What is our insurance? If you worked a job and that money is somewhere out there in the either land, you need to check and see where that money is and what's going on with it. Just don't leave it out there, right? If you know you work for the state of Illinois or for one of these pension plans and you're not there anymore, check your money. Find out where your money is. Find out what's happening with your money. Like she said, have a conversation about your money. I think that's the biggest, besides just saving your money, have a conversation about your money. I think that is the biggest takeaway that I can leave you about your money today.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee. Corliss, dear.
I'm ready. I'm gonna pull up the rear.
Bring us home, Corliss. But what I love about Corliss is you bring a broad perspective, right? That you bring a broad perspective in terms of the breadth of experience that you've had relative to different financial services roles, and then also your community involvement. So you, to me, have a very holistic and comprehensive perspective that I'd like you to provide some thoughts about.
Yeah, so you mentioned a silver lining, and what comes to mind for me is we can do this. That's the silver lining for me. I actually write a financial education column for the Chicago Defender, and I also have a Facebook page that I invite all of you to join. And Dr. Monica, you will appreciate this title. It's called "Got My Mind on My Money and My Money on My Mind," just like that. So yes, I was listening to Snoop Dogg when I did this, but it's a page where I talk about all things financial in a very basic layman's term. I think too often terms go over our heads and we don't understand them, so I bring them down to levels where everyone can understand. So I really do encourage you to join that page. But on that page and in the Defender, I wrote about Reverend Willie T. Barrow.
Oh, yes.
And if you're not familiar with Reverend Barrow, she is a civil rights icon. She stood about 5 feet tall, but she walked among giants, and she was a giant herself. She was born in 1924. She was one of few women that worked in, I believe, the steel mill industry back in that day. She was out in Seattle. She started ministry in Seattle in a primarily white community. And she found her way to Chicago, I believe, in the 40s, where she really just kicked up a lot of dust and made a lot of waves and made a lot of change. But Reverend Barrow is important to me in that perspective, but in another perspective, because she was very thoughtful. I call her a boss. She was extremely thoughtful about what her legacy would be. And in that, she planned. She thought about how she managed her money, how she built her wealth, and what she would do with it after she was gone. So step in the African American legacy, as well as Alicia Tate in her former role at the Chicago Foundation for Women. Reverend Barrow was very specific about what she wanted to do for women and girls in Chicago, and for black women and girls in Chicago. And she left money to do that. So now there is a fund in her name that is designed to create leadership opportunities for black women and girls, and that fund was launched, I believe, this summer. And it is a cohort-based program where black women and girls will come together and think about how they can be civic and community leaders, how they can be Reverend Willie T. Barrows in Chicago. So I share that story to say that we can do this. When you think about Reverend Barrow in the time that she came up in this country, when nothing was easy for black women, she did it. She thought about it, she made it happen, and she has a legacy. So I will leave everyone in this room with, you can do this. You have the tools, you have experts like these ladies on the panel, you have congresswomen who are fighting for us every day to change laws, change policies, to make things equitable for us, but we also have a responsibility to think about how we plan, how we build community, how we build wealth, and how we build our legacies. So walk out of here saying that you can do this.
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you, Corliss. I knew you could do that too. So we'll wrap up, and I just want to just quickly go down the panel and just quickly tell me what you want your legacy to be. I'll start with you, Corliss.
I want my legacy to be that I left it better than I found it. That's it.
Okay, Renee?
My legacy that I'm building is really diversity and inclusion on a grand scale with corporations, and also building leadership with women who are coming after me. I feel very strongly about that.
Thank you.
My legacy is to create a world of enlightened, empowered individuals who themselves enlighten and empower others.
Thank you.
Women are designed to run the world, and the time to do it is now.
Yes.
And on that note, We thank you all, and please thank this amazing panel of these amazing Black women. Thank you, Audra, and I've been told to stay.
All of you, actually, don't move.
Yeah, okay.
We need another round of applause. Come a bigger one. Come on.